The founder took his own life in despair. A supervisor hijacked the company in the chaos, and a strict flight ban reduced this blue-blood aviation giant to pounding out iron walks just to make payroll. They were practically waiting to die, surrounded by cold stares and debt collection notices. But these aviation madmen refused to accept their fate. Instead, they locked their sights on some dust-covered, abandoned parts in the corner and pulled off a terrifyingly effective leverage. Shoving an aviation engine that had just set a 30,000-foot altitude record straight into a two-wheeled motorcycle. Relying on the absolute overkill of their tech, this dying factory instantly slapped the entire market in the face, completely forging a century of desperate survival into a violent aesthetic that rules the streets today. This is the blood-soaked comeback story of BMW, crawling out of the ruins. This mechanical empire, famous for its handling and performance, has its century-long roots soaked in the blood, sweat, and humiliation of its founders. Born in 1883, Gustav Otto lived half his life in the massive shadow of his family. As the son of Nikolaus Otto, the legendary inventor of the four-stroke internal combustion engine, Gustav earned his pilot's license in 1910, attempting to carve out his own territory in the sky at the Puchheim airfield outside Munich. But reality was brutally unforgiving. The early aviation engines he personally fitted onto wooden and canvas biplanes suffered from atrocious quality control. The combat planes delivered to the Prussian army in the early days of World War I experienced severe mechanical failures, and a string of crashes completely enraged the military. Core procurement orders were forcibly severed. By late 1915, the Munich factory's finances had completely dried up. The crushing weight of bankruptcy shattered Gustav's mental defenses, and severe depression forced him off the production line and into a psychiatric hospital. In March 1916, the local Bavarian government, high-ranking military officials, and a banking syndicate swooped in, launching a hostile takeover of the desperate Otto flying machine factory, stripping it down and restructuring it into the Bavarian Aircraft Works. Lying in his hospital bed, Gustav was ruthlessly stripped of his life's work by pure capital. 10 years later, on February 28, 1926, in the bitter late winter cold of Munich, a 43-year-old Gustav, tormented by the loss of his career and the death of his wife, walked alone toward the end of his life in a deserted late-night apartment. He swallowed a lethal dose of pills, using his tragic sacrifice to consecrate the future takeoff of the restructured enterprise. During the exact same period, on the other side of Munich, Karl Rapp was also teetering on the edge of bankruptcy and liquidation. In 1916, the inline-six aviation engine spearheaded by this founder was found to have a fatal physical resonance defect. The violent mechanical vibrations not only made it impossible for pilots to control the aircraft, but could even shake apart the fragile wooden frames and canvas skins of early fighter planes mid-air. The German High Command issued a strict order refusing to deploy Rapp's original engines to the front lines of World War I. To plug the black hole in their cash flow, the once arrogant Rapp Motorenwerke swallowed its pride and became a contract manufacturer for its peers, relying on producing 12-cylinder aviation engines for Austro-Daimler just to scrape together the workers' monthly wages. The pivot that reversed this death spiral came from a cold-blooded betrayal and a top-down talent poaching. In late 1916, the Austro-Hungarian Navy urgently needed a batch of powerful aviation engines. They dispatched a 30-year-old Austrian naval engineer, Franz Josef Popp, to Munich as the omnipotent overseer to supervise the inspection of over 300 engines. Upon arriving on site, Popp immediately saw through the factory's weak hand. Rapp's engines were structurally fragile with a sky-high scrap rate. But he didn't follow protocol and submit a breach of contract report to Vienna. Instead, while touring a secluded workshop, he discovered Max Friz, a genius engineer who had been severely marginalized by founder Karl Rapp. Using his military background and funding approval privileges, Pop kept the factory boss in the dark and secretly funneled high-grade materials and research funds to Friz in a makeshift underground lab. In the spring of 1917, Friz delivered the complete blueprints for a Type 3 high-altitude engine on his drawing board. He innovatively added a high-altitude carburetor, flawlessly overcoming the sudden power drops caused by thin, high-altitude air through the precise coordination of 3 mixing chambers and 5 throttle valves. In July of that year, a Prussian military inspection team arrived in Munich to assess the factory's viability. Their original directive was to strip the factory of its research rights and downgrade it to a mere assembly plant. But when the military brass laid eyes on Friz's blueprints, without even seeing a physical prototype, they instantly slapped down a massive blind order for 600 engines on the spot. This paper order instantly became the spark for a corporate coup that would entirely purge the founder. Armed with the perfect blueprints and a massive military contract, Pop dropped his overseer facade and secretly contacted the factory's biggest financial backer, Austrian speculative capitalist Camillo Castiglione. The two laid their cards on the table before the factory's board of directors, using cold, hard data to prove that founder Karl Rapp's terrible technical incompetence was the single biggest obstacle preventing the company from cashing in on military profits. On July 21, 1917, top management held a secret meeting, instantly abolishing the company's sign bearing the founder's name and officially renaming it Bayerische Motorenwerke. Just 4 days later, the partners handed Karl Rapp his final sentence, forcibly terminating all his employment contracts and throwing the nominal founding father out on the street. Pop, a master of capital manipulation, took full control as general manager, completing his hostile takeover from resident overseer to supreme ruler. Freed from internal red tape, this technology-driven machine began to display a terrifying ability to push physical limits. On June 17, 1919, test pilot Franz Zeno Diemer flew a specially built biplane powered by Friz's modified BMW Type 4 inline-6 engine, taking off from Munich's Oberwiesenfeld airfield. Sitting in an open, unpressurized cockpit at minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit without any supplemental oxygen, Diemer spent 87 minutes forcing the plane up to the edge of the stratosphere at 32,000 feet. This physics-defying feat relied entirely on Friz's ingenious dual pushrod high-altitude carburetor. During takeoff and low-altitude flight, the throttle's opening angle was strictly limited to prevent the ultra-high compression ratio from blowing the engine. Only when the plane broke the 13,000-foot red line did Diemer push the second high-altitude rod. The carburetor precisely altered the fuel-air mixture, allowing this machine to violently crank out 230 horsepower even in the extreme thin air. Upon landing, Diemer's physiological limits were at the brink of death, but the engine's oxygen supply and combustion still had power in reserve. However, this sky-shattering victory was instantly ground to dust by the political meat grinder. Germany's defeat in World War I led to its forceful expulsion by the International Aeronautical Federation, and the official body refused to certify the high-altitude flight data. The subsequent Treaty of Versailles strictly banned Germany from manufacturing any aviation engines. The Allied powers even explicitly demanded the confiscation of all fighter planes equipped with BMW engines. Military orders vanished overnight. Over 3,000 workers faced the imminent threat of going unpaid. To save their expensive machinery from being liquidated, General Manager Pop was forced into a deeply humiliating contract with Berlin's Knorr company in 1919. The precision assembly lines that once crafted high-tolerance aviation engines were retrofitted to churn out clunky pneumatic train brakes. Top-tier aviation mechanics were reduced to assembling brake pads and air valves day in and day out just to earn a meager contract fee. This degrading survival stint even led to the majority of BMW's shares being legally swallowed up by Knorr for a time. Even more suffocating survival tactics were playing out on the factory floor. Facing strict armament inspections by Allied commissioners, the factory's mountain of aviation-grade aluminum and premium aircraft frame wood risked being destroyed as illegal military contraband. To cash out and make payroll before the inspectors confiscated everything, the workers fired up the furnaces overnight, melting down expensive scrap aviation aluminum and crudely casting it into civilian frying pans and tea kettles for everyday households. The top-tier aviation wood meant to fly through the blue skies was rushed through the carpentry shop to make batches of office desks and kitchen cabinets, sold off cheaply on the streets. Chief genius designer Max Friz tearfully took his proud core aviation tech and downgraded it to the extreme, cobbling together a 4-cylinder water-cooled industrial engine. This blue blood engine was unceremoniously stuffed into tractors, agricultural harvesters, and lumberyard generators. This once dominant lord of the skies had to swallow the bitter pill of survival, scraping by on mud-covered farm equipment and crude, flat-bottomed iron pans. But when you push a group of highly obsessive aviation engineers into a corner, the backlash is bound to be violently explosive. To keep the factory's pure mechanical spark alive, Max Friz decided to rip open a breakthrough via two-wheeled transport. By December 1922, he completed the full engineering blueprints for the R32 motorcycle. Facing a market flooded with shoddily made, chain-driven bikes, Friz executed a ruthless, category-killing move. He directly ported over the horizontally opposed twin-cylinder architecture from aviation engines, building a 494 cubic centimeter engine. To completely solve the fatal overheating issues of the rear cylinder in early motorcycles, Friz used pure aviation aerodynamics. He rotated the entire engine 90 degrees into a longitudinal crankshaft layout, allowing the two cylinders to protrude horizontally from both sides of the frame, perfectly utilizing the natural headwind for cooling while riding. For the transmission, he ditched the belts that easily snapped on gravel roads and applied a rigid aviation-grade drivetrain, pairing a flange-mounted gearbox with a solid drive shaft. In May 1923, before official mass production, Friz personally rode the 268-pound R32 prototype in a grueling endurance race across the treacherous Bavarian mountains. On a track filled with mud and gravel, the R32 crushed the field with its aviation-grade mechanical redundancy, finishing with a perfect score of 0 deductions. At the time, over 130 motorcycle manufacturers were fighting tooth and nail in Germany. The R32, with a naked sticker price of a staggering 2,200 marks, was incredibly expensive. Yet, it sold over 3,000 units in just 3 years, aggressively carving out a lifeline for the factory right on the edge of the cliff. Riding the terrifying dominance of their two-wheeled success, General Manager Pop initiated a textbook capital shell game. In 1922, to completely shake off the merger and absorption by the old Knorr brake factory, Pop teamed up with capitalist Castiglione, dropping 75 million marks. They didn't buy the physical factory that was making brake pads. Instead, they surgically extracted and bought out the brand name, the blue and white logo rights, and the core engine patents. With these intangible assets in hand, Pop and the core technical team jumped ship en masse, relocating to the former site of the Bavarian Aircraft Works near Munich's Olympic Park. Ironically, this was the exact bankrupt shell left behind when Gustav Otto was forcibly restructured. Pop and his crew hijacked the nest, hung up the BMW sign, and exploited a legal loophole to claim the Bavarian Aircraft Works founding date of March 1916 as their own, completing the ultimate corporate body snatching. At the very source of their trademark design, this group displayed an equally ruthless pragmatism to skirt the rules. Back in October 1917, when filing their trademark application with the Imperial Patent Office, German trademark law strictly prohibited the direct commercial use of official regional coats of arms. To get around this, the design team kept the black outer ring of the original RAP logo, divided the inner circle into 4 quadrants, and forcibly altered the diamond array of the Bavarian state flag into alternating blue and white blocks, read clockwise from the top left. In the original archives of the Imperial Patent Office, there wasn't a single word in the blueprints mentioning a propeller concept. This blue and white totem, later worshipped by the world, was initially nothing more than a legal sidestep to anchor its regional bloodline. While the motorcycle business stopped the factory's bleeding, these arrogant engineers knew very well that the carrying capacity and market ceiling of 2-wheeled machines could never support their massive mechanical ambitions. During this grueling recovery period, Pop cast his cold gaze across the Munich factory floors, over the Bavarian mountains, and finally locked dead onto a near-bankrupt automotive contract factory in the city of Eisenach, and specifically onto a pile of cheap, oil-smelling British microcar parts sitting in its warehouse, complete with right-hand drive steering wheels. A far more humiliating yet utterly insane cross-disciplinary gamble was about to detonate amidst a pile of rusting 4-wheeled scrap iron. By October 1928, in front of the assembly lines at the Eisenach car factory in Germany, a group of BMW mechanics, men used to assembling 30,000-foot altitude engines with sub-millimeter tolerances, were staring blankly at a pile of loose components shipped over in crates from the Longbridge plant in the UK. To secure their entry ticket into the 4-wheeled world, BMW management had funded the buyout of this nearly bankrupt contract factory. Their true motive was simply to legally take over the factory's production license for the British Austin 7 microcar. This cheap commuter car, which topped out at just 45 miles per hour and maxed out at 15 horsepower, became the absolute zero point of this giant's automaking history. It had zero German DNA. It was purely a right-hand drive British kit car. The mechanical engineers who once conquered the Stratosphere with ultra-high compression ratios began a ruthless, localized teardown in the workshop. From late 1927 to early 1929, they performed deep mechanical surgery. They forcefully altered the steering geometry, converting the British right-hand cockpit entirely to the left. To wipe out the restrictions of the British blueprints, they stripped every single British standard nut and bolt off the car, replacing them with the metric fasteners standard in German industry. The chassis was completely torn down and rebuilt, fitted with locally produced Bosch shock absorbers, reshaping it into a transitional model codenamed DA1, the German abbreviation for First German Version. It wasn't until the height of summer in 1929 that this microcar saw a true form shift. The BMW team forcefully retrofitted it with a four-wheel braking system and a roomier, modified body, upgrading it to the DA2 version. This prideful Bavarian titan finally lowered its stance, officially embedding the blue and white circular badge, the symbol of its aviation engine glory, onto this 900-pound rebadged microcar for the very first time. It was the leap from 30,000 feet in the air down to a ground-hugging microcar. Right as this 900-pound proxy car was struggling to break into the civilian market, BMW desperately needed to generate marketing hype for the American Pratt & Whitney radial aviation engines they had just acquired the license to produce. In 1929, BMW's PR team dropped a hand-drawn advertisement in a public magazine. The image featured two vintage biplanes tearing through the clouds. Playing on optical illusion, the artist illustrated the blur of the spinning wooden propellers as giant BMW blue and white roundels. This ad originally meant only to sell the rotational dynamics of their new aviation engines, utilized precise visual deception to plant a subconscious seed in the German public's mind. The blue and white logo equals a spinning propeller. This visual narrative, born purely out of a sales pitch, was ultimately cemented as fact by the authorities during a global war. In 1942, at the peak of the German aviation military-industrial expansion during World War II, BMW published a feature article in its official internal publication, the BMW Factory magazine, to drum up a sense of honor among assembly line workers and the military. Chief editor Wilhelm Fahrenkopf personally penned the piece, accompanied by an illustration of a roaring airplane engine where the spinning center was replaced by a high-def BMW logo. For the first time, through an authoritative internal publication, BMW officially and actively bound its brand to war machines. The widespread distribution of this magazine buried the truth of their 1917 trademark registration, which merely chopped up the colors of the Bavarian flag to dodge trademark laws, and completed the ultimate official brainwashing loop in automotive history, planting the propeller myth deep into the psyche of global consumers. The prosperity brought by the fires of war soon faced a physical reckoning. After the war ended in 1945, Allied bomber fleets flattened BMW's core Milbertshofen plant in Munich into a wasteland. The factory was reduced to rubble, and the surviving cutting-edge aviation engine manufacturing equipment was entirely dismantled and shipped out of Germany on trains as war reparations. Backed into a corner where producing any motor vehicles or aircraft was strictly forbidden, the factory's technical director at the time, Kurt Donath, launched a survival operation dubbed the Emergency Production Plan, just to keep his remaining skilled workers and production lines intact. These mechanical engineers, who had once built tens of thousands of radial aviation engines, scavenged through the rubble for leftover military scrap. They tossed high-purity aviation aluminum back into the furnaces and die-cast them into frying pans, stew pots, and kitchenware using crude molds. By dimensionally downgrading to blacksmithing household goods, this company barely managed to hold on to its payroll and workforce amidst the devastated ruins. When the survival crisis finally lifted, all that repressed internal combustion research and development experience started looking for a violent release valve on the racetrack. Fast forward to May 1972. BMW was getting absolutely dragged by the Ford team in the European Touring Car Championship. Then BMW president Eberhard von Kuenheim made a scorched earth decision. He marched straight into the Ford team's camp with money and privilege and poached their head manager, Jochen Neerpasch, along with his entire team. Neerpasch's sole condition for taking the job was that this new crew had to be entirely severed from the bureaucratic red tape of BMW's civilian car division. In a rundown garage right next to the Munich plant, an independent squad of just 35 mechanical madmen officially set up shop as BMW Motorsport. They carried zero commercial sales targets. Their financial ledgers showed nothing but massive research and development hemorrhaging. Their only mission was to build track racing machines. Their very first creation, the 3.0 CSL, was slapped with outrageously aggressive aero kits to chase absolute aerodynamic perfection. Because this massive rear wing, dubbed the Batmobile, was considered an illegal modification under German traffic laws and couldn't be driven on public roads, they literally unbolted the wings at the factory, threw them in the trunk, and told buyers to find an empty lot to install them themselves. This total disregard for civilian norms set the baseline for this Special Forces unit, operating constantly on the ragged edge of the rules. To squeeze every last drop of horsepower out of the internal combustion engine, they turned their sights to the Junkyard. Between 1982 and 1983, M-Division engine guru Paul Roche and his team of grimy mechanics were developing a 1.5-liter turbocharged Formula One engine, but they hit a wall. The engine blocks kept violently exploding, unable to handle the massive boost pressures. Instead of retreating to a lab to cook up some expensive new alloy, this gang of engineers swarmed the used car lots and scrapyards on the outskirts of Germany. They went hunting specifically for ordinary BMW civilian four-cylinder engines that had clocked over 60,000 miles or were outright totaled. Roche swore by a counterintuitive law of physics. An old cast-iron block that had been tortured through years of extreme heat and cold by everyday drivers on public roads had completely released all its internal metal stress. It was nature's perfect high-pressure material. They tossed these scavenged junkyard blocks into the factory's backyard, leaving them exposed to the sun and rain for months. Rumor has it that, to accelerate the nitriding process for surface hardening, the engineers would literally step out in the middle of the night and pee directly onto these old blocks. This pure psychotic dedication to pushing mechanical limits allowed those old blocks to withstand terrifying boost levels in qualifying, squeezing a mind-bending 1,400 horsepower out of a measly 1.5 liters of displacement, and outright clinching the World Championship that year. This kind of overkill track technology eventually ripped open the doors to the civilian market in the most direct way possible. In 1986, the International Automobile Federation issued the rules for Group A touring car racing, mandating a hard rule. Competing cars had to produce and sell 5,000 street-legal homologation specials within 12 consecutive months. To get their track entry ticket, Paul Roche and his crew were forced to build a production car. Ignoring all concerns for daily driving smoothness or cabin soundproofing, they simply took the high-revving engine meant for formula racing, chopped off 2 cylinders, and forcefully crammed it into the engine bay of a standard 3 Series sedan. To fit wider racing slicks for the track, the engineers couldn't even wait for the factory to make molds. They grabbed hammers and angle grinders overnight, violently flaring out the bodywork of the test car and bashing out what would become those iconic wide-body wheel arches. Those 5,000 street-legal sedans that flooded the market were essentially a fabricated street-legal race car whipped up just so the M division could meet racing regulations. When this first-generation M3, carrying the chassis code E30 and dripping with track-ready tuning, hit the streets, it shattered every existing standard in the performance car market. The sky-high red lines, the rock-hard suspension, and the razor-sharp throttle response completely blew away the era's standard of compromising for comfort. From the scrapped aviation engine blueprints rejected by the military a century ago for vibration issues, to the aluminum frying pans cast overnight just to make payroll. From the internal coup sparked by stolen blueprints, to the Formula One engine blocks hardened by junkyard urine. Every single technological breakthrough from this automaker stems from pushing available resources to their absolute breaking point while standing on the brink of survival. Every time a ban backed them into a dead end, they found a leverage point hidden in the corner where no one else looked.